I woke up to the sound of bulldozers on my private island. The HOA claimed they had the right to take my land, but they didn't know who they were messing with. They built 172 solar panels on my property without my consent. So I raised an army of trees to fight back. And trust me, I don't lose. I woke up to a low, rumbling noise that rattled my bedroom windows. It wasn't thunder, and it certainly wasn't the peaceful sounds of lake water lapping at my private island shores. My pulse quickened as I threw off my sheets and rushed to the window. What I saw made my breath hitch. Massive yellow bulldozers rolled across my lawn, crushing my freshly planted garden under their steel treads. Workers in hard hats stomped through my property like they owned it, marking spots and driving stakes into the ground. The small wooden fence I had built near the water's edge completely flattened. What the hell? I muttered, yanking on my sneakers and rushing out onto my porch, still in my pajamas. Stop! Stop right now! I shouted, my voice barely carrying over the sound of machinery. The workers ignored me. A man in a neon vest barked orders, while another climbed onto a backhoe and started digging into my flower beds. Rage coursed through me as I fumbled for my phone and called the police. There are bulldozers tearing up my yard, my private property. I need officers here now. The response I got made my blood run cold. Sir, we've already received a call from the Pinehurst Point HOA. They have proper permits for this work. I almost dropped my phone. What? But the officer had already hung up. My private island, my sanctuary that I had worked for decades to afford, was being invaded, and the police weren't going to do a damn thing about it. I stormed across my ruined lawn, searching for whoever was in charge. Standing near a sleek black SUV, clipboard in hand, was a woman in an expensive navy blue suit. She had the air of someone who had never struggled a day in her life, and when she turned to face me, she wore a polite but cold smile. Mr. Reynolds, I presume? I clenched my fists. What the hell is going on? Who are you, and why are bulldozers on my land? She offered her hand as if we were at a business meeting. I ignored it. Judith Palmer, president of the Pinehurst Point Homeowners Association. She said smoothly, we've approved the installation of 172 solar panels on the eastern shore of your property. It's for the benefit of the community. I almost laughed. The community? This is my private island. Actually, she said, her smile tightening, the HOA has access rights to waterfront properties under Section 8, Paragraph 12 of the covenant you signed when purchasing your home. She pulled out a document from her designer bag and held it up like a golden ticket. I grabbed it and scanned the section. My stomach dropped. I had bought this island home 6 months ago. It was connected to mainland by a small bridge, but my deed had explicitly stated private property. Now, this paperwork suggested otherwise. My lawyer had told me everything I signed was standard. Now I wasn't so sure. I want to see this covenant in full, I said, barely keeping my voice steady. Of course, Judith replied, tucking the document away. Stop by the HOA office anytime. But the work continues. Behind me, the second bulldozer obliterated my wooden gazebo, the one where I had my coffee every morning, watching the sunrise over the lake. I felt sick. I stormed back into my house and immediately called my real estate lawyer, Simon. They're saying the HOA has rights to use my property, I said, pacing my destroyed yard. Some covenant clause, Section 8, Paragraph 12. You told me I was buying a private island. Simon, explain. Simon was silent for a long moment. Then a sigh. That wasn't in the original contract. I'd have caught it. Send me a copy now. I wasted no time. Within minutes, I had scanned and emailed the document Judith had shown me. 30 minutes later, Simon called back. His tone was grim. Bad news, he said. That clause was added recently, probably after you signed. It should have required 75% homeowner approval and formal registration with the county. I need to check records to see if this was legally done. My stomach churned. If it wasn't, then the HOA is overstepping their authority. I had a sliver of hope, but then Simon added, unfortunately, they'll argue verbal approval or claim the paperwork was misplaced. We need more evidence. I looked out at my once pristine island, now a construction zone. I needed more than evidence. I needed a way to stop them. That night, I sat on my porch, watching the floodlights illuminate my ruined land. Workers had started setting concrete foundations where my trees and flowers once stood. The lake, the very reason I had bought this property, now reflected the harsh glare of industrial lighting. A small boat approached my dock. Eleanor Wallace, my elderly neighbor from across the lake, climbed onto my dock with careful steps. She had lived in Pinehurst Point for decades. "I came as soon as I heard," she said, looking around with sorrowful eyes. "This isn't right." I let out a bitter laugh. "Tell me about it." "Can they really do this?" she asked, glancing at the workers. I clenched my jaw. "Judith claims they can." Eleanor sighed. "Judith changed many rules when she became HOA president 3 years ago. No one challenged her because they didn't think she'd push things this far. The solar project was her big campaign promise, but everyone assumed it would go on the community center roof." I frowned. "Then why my island?" She hesitated. "Because your property gets the most sunlight." And she exhaled. "Judith tried to buy this island last year. The previous owner refused to sell to her." A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't about community benefits. This was personal. The next morning, Simon called me again, his voice even more serious than before. "I checked the county records," he said. "That covenant clause was never legally approved." Hope flared in my chest. "So their project is illegal?" "Not that simple," Simon warned. "They could claim homeowner consent or lost paperwork. We need undeniable proof of fraud." I looked out at the workers unloading solar panels from trucks. Time was running out. That afternoon, I attended a community HOA meeting at the Mainlands Community Center. As I slipped into the back of the crowded room, I heard Judith at the podium. "The solar initiative will reduce everyone's electric bills by 35% and qualifies us for tax benefits," she declared. A man raised his hand. "I thought the panels were going on the community center roof. When did this change?" Judith smiled, ever the politician. "Engineering reports showed the roof wasn't suitable. Mr. Reynolds' island, however, is ideal." I stood. "And did anyone bother asking me?" Silence fell over the room. Judith's lips thinned. "Mr. Reynolds, please wait to be recognized before speaking." A blonde woman in oversized sunglasses, Kara Matthews, the HOA vice president, stood up. "New homeowners must understand how things work here," she said sweetly. I crossed my arms. "By how things work, you mean taking my land without consent?" Karen's smile didn't waver. "The covenant you signed gives us rights." I scanned the room. Some neighbors looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. Judith sighed. "Security. Please escort Mr. Reynolds out if he refuses to follow meeting protocol." A large man approached me. I left, but not before noticing Eleanor in the crowd, watching me with knowing eyes. The battle for my island had just begun. I stormed out of the community center, my pulse hammering in my ears. The meeting had been a farce, a carefully controlled spectacle where dissent was silenced before it could take root. As I crossed the parking lot, a voice called out behind me. "Mr. Reynolds, wait." I turned to see a middle-aged woman, glancing around nervously before stepping closer. She had short auburn hair and wore a sweater with the Pinehurst Point logo stitched on the chest. "My name is Lisa," she said quickly. I want to say, I agree with you. A lot of us do." My anger flared. "Then why the hell did anyone speak up in there?" She winced, looking over her shoulder as if Judith or Karen might appear at any moment. "The last person who challenged the HOA lost his dock permit," she whispered. "Then his mailbox was mysteriously smashed 3 times in 1 month. He got violation notices for things no one else did, like leaving his porch light on past 10 p.m. I stared at her. "You're telling me they punish people for disagreeing?" Lisa nodded. "Judith and Karen control everything. The security, the community funds. The rule changes. If you push too hard, they'll find a way to make your life hell." I exhaled sharply. "That's corruption." She nodded but took a step back. "Be careful, Mr. Reynolds. They won't stop until they get what they want." She hurried off before I could say another word. I stood there for a long moment, watching her disappear into crowd. Fear. That's what Judith relied on. I wasn't afraid of HOA fines or Karen's smug threats. But now, I realized my fight wasn't just about me. If I lost, everyone who opposed him would lose. 2. That evening, as I pulled my boat up to the dock, a glaring reflection nearly blinded me. The first row of solar panels had been installed. They stretched across my once pristine shoreline like an ugly metallic scar, shimmering in the setting sun. But it wasn't just the sight that made my stomach churn. It was the glare. The panels reflected the sunlight straight into my living room windows, turning my home into a blinding furnace by midday. That wasn't all. At night, blinking maintenance lights flashed across the water, disrupting the peace I had moved here for. And then there was the buzzing. A faint but constant humming noise filled the air, coming from the panel inverters. It wasn't loud, but it was relentless. A noise you don't notice at first, until it's all you can hear. By the third night, I hadn't slept a full hour. I filed a formal complaint with the county. No response. I showed up at the next HOA meeting with documentation. Karen cut me off mid-sentence. The community needs sustainable energy, she announced, adjusting her designer sunglasses. Indoors. I barely had time to react before she added. Besides, we grandfather your boathouse, even though it's 6 inches taller than regulations allow. It would be a shame if we had to revisit that. I clenched my jaw. They were monitoring my property, searching for anything they could use against me. Judith simply smiled. The matter is closed. That night, I sat on my porch, staring at the ugly steel panels ruining my view. If I couldn't beat them through legal channels, I needed a new strategy. The next morning, I received a certified letter from the HOA. Violation notice. Unapproved landscaping modifications. Fine. $200 per day. I crumpled the paper in my fist. They were fining me for replanting the flower beds they had destroyed. I stormed down to the HOA office. The receptionist, a young woman with tired eyes, barely looked up as she handed me another stack of violation notices. Excessive noise from construction activities. Unauthorized obstruction of community resources. Failure to maintain aesthetic standards. I laughed bitterly. Are you serious? These fines are completely made up. The receptionist gave me an apologetic look. I don't make the rules. Of course, she didn't. Judith did. I looked around. 2 security guards loomed near the entrance. Every homeowner in the waiting area sat silent, eyes downcast. Fear. That's what kept Judith in power. And it worked. I walked out with my stack of fines. I had 2 choices. Fight legally and drown in fees, or get creative. That night, I rummaged through a box of books my grandfather had left me. He had been a botanist, obsessed with fast-growing native species. I flipped through an old leather-bound journal filled with handwritten notes. Then one line caught my eye. Hybrid poplars and empress trees, capable of growing 8 to 12 feet per year. I sat up straight. If I couldn't remove the solar panels, maybe I could make them useless. I grabbed my phone and called Eleanor. I need your help. The next morning, I met Eleanor at her lakeside cottage. Her garden was the most beautiful in the community, a jungle of vibrant flowers, thick hedges, and towering trees. She smiled as she led me to a hidden greenhouse. Inside, rows of seedlings stood in neat trays, their leaves glistening with dew. These are my fastest growers, she said, running a hand over their leaves. I showed her my grandfather's notes. Would these block the panels? Eleanor's eyes twinkled mischievously. With my special fertilizer mix? She grinned. They'll grow like weeds. I felt a rare flicker of hope. How many can you spare? She chuckled. I won't spare a single one. I frowned. What? I'll give you 200, and I'll help you plant them. I blinked. Eleanor, that's... She cut me off. Judith has controlled this place too long. Time someone stood up to her. We loaded 200 seedlings onto my boat. As I sailed back to my island, the ugly solar panels glared at me from shore. They thought they had won. But by next year, my trees would rise, tall and strong. And the sunlight Judith stole from me, I was about to take it back. The night air was thick with humidity as I stood on my shoreline, gripping a shovel. The moon cast a pale glow over the island, but I still kept my headlamp dim, just enough to see where I was digging. The HOA had eyes everywhere. If I was caught, I had no doubt that Judith would find a way to destroy my plan before it even had a chance to take root. I knelt and carefully placed the first hybrid poplar seedling into the soil. Its tiny leaves trembled as I patted the dirt around its base. Grow fast, I whispered. I worked quickly, moving down the shoreline, planting each tree in a strategic formation. Eleanor had helped me map out exactly where they needed to go, where they would completely block the solar panels from the sun once they reached full height. I had just finished planting my 30th tree when the entire shoreline flooded with light. "Who's there?" a voice barked. My heart slammed against my ribs. I turned, shovel in hand, to see a security guard marching toward me, flashlight aimed at my face. I forced myself to stay calm. "Just doing some late-night gardening," I said, keeping my tone casual. "Cooler at night." The guard lowered his flashlight slightly, eyes narrowing. "These look like trees." I swallowed. "Decorative shrubs. For privacy." The guard studied the rows of freshly planted saplings. I braced myself, expecting him to radio Judith and have her shut me down before I could finish. Then, unexpectedly, his face softened. "My grandfather had his farm taken through eminent domain," he muttered. "They said it was for a shopping mall. Took everything. Never sat right with me." I hesitated. "That's awful." He exhaled. "Miss Palmer specifically instructed us to report any activity near the solar installation." I felt my stomach sink. "Here it comes." Then the guard clicked off his flashlight. "I don't come to this side of the island until 2 a.m. That gives you 3 more hours." For the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Hope. As soon as he walked away, I got back to work. By dawn, all 200 trees were in the ground. Each one was a soldier in my war against the HOA. The next day, I barely had time to recover before Judith showed up on my doorstep. She didn't even wait for me to invite her in. She just stormed inside like she already owned the place. "Mr. Reynolds," she snapped, shoving a stack of papers at me. "You are in violation of HOA landscaping regulations." I glanced at the papers. New fines. Unauthorized vegetation growth. $500 per day. Obstruction of community resources. $750 per day. Environmental disruption fee. $300 per day. I almost laughed. Environmental disruption? I repeated. "You bulldozed my yard to install an industrial power plant on my land, but I'm an environmental threat?" Judith's eyes narrowed. "Remove the trees immediately, or your fees will reach over $5,000 per week." I folded my arms. "Or what?" She smirked. "We'll place a lien on your property." I clenched my fists. They weren't just trying to find me into submission. They wanted to financially crush me until I had no choice but to sell. But I wasn't giving up that easily. I grabbed my own copy of the HOA bylaws and flipped through the pages. Section 5.7 explicitly permits homeowners to plant native species for erosion control, I said, which is exactly what I've done. Judith's lips thinned. "The board will vote on this tonight." I smirked. "I'll be there." That afternoon, as I was preparing for the HOA meeting, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Check your email. Sent documents you need. Not everyone supports Judith's solar scheme. I hesitated, then checked my inbox. An email with no subject line. A single attachment. Truth.pdf. I opened it. Inside were meeting minutes from 2 years ago. Judith had proposed a solar